Julia's day began like any other at the Galactic Academy. She shuffled through the vast corridors of the school, a sprawling complex that gleamed with alien architecture. The halls buzzed with activity, filled with students from dozens of species. Her human presence was a rare anomaly among the towering Zargathians, luminescent Elvirites, and shadowy Yurnoks. While Julia often felt the weight of their stares and whispers, she had grown accustomed to the silent judgment of those who viewed humans as primitive outsiders. That morning, however, the atmosphere was different. Whispers weren't just directed at her, they filled the entire academy, thick with unease and anticipation. When Julia entered the main lecture hall, she immediately sensed the tension. The large holographic projector flickered to life at the center of the room. Principal Var Kran, a towering Xylethian with a translucent head that shimmered with the colors of his mood, stepped forward. His normally pale blue hue shifted to a stern red as he addressed the assembly. Attention, students and faculty of the Galactic Academy, his voice boomed, reverberating through the hall. After much deliberation, the High Council has made a decision regarding the presence of human students within our institution. Julia's heart sank. She glanced around, seeing the smirks of her peers and hearing the muted chuckles of those who had long dismissed her as unworthy. The announcement confirmed her worst fears. As of today, Var Kran continued, all humans are to be expelled from the academy. Their academic performance has been deemed insufficient, and their cultural contributions negligible. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. While many alien students seemed smug, others exchanged surprised glances. The Academy prided itself on diversity, welcoming species from across the galaxy to foster mutual understanding. To expel an entire species was unprecedented. Julia's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to shout, to argue, but her voice felt stuck in her throat. Beside her, a fellow human student, David, muttered, "This is ridiculous. How can they decide this without a fair trial?" The principal's voice droned on, outlining the logistics of their removal. You will have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Your academic records will be transferred back to your home planet. This decision is final. Julia stood abruptly, the sudden movement drawing attention. "Excuse me, Principal Var Kran," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet defiance. The hall fell silent, every eye now on her. "On what grounds is this decision being made? Humans have worked just as hard as any other species here. Some of us have even excelled." The Xylethian's head shifted to a deeper crimson. "Miss Julia, this decision is based on extensive data collected by the High Council. Humans have failed to meet the rigorous standards of this institution." "What standards?" Julia pressed, stepping forward. "Are we being judged on metrics that account for our unique strengths? Or are you comparing us to species with vastly different abilities and declaring us inferior by default?" A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Even some alien students seemed to nod thoughtfully. Var Kran, clearly irritated, leaned forward. "The decision is not up for debate. This assembly is adjourned." Julia wasn't ready to back down. "If it's not up for debate, then let me prove you wrong," she said, her voice rising. "Give me one chance to show that humans belong here. Let me take on whatever challenge you believe we're unfit for. If I fail, I'll leave willingly. But if I succeed, you'll have to admit that your decision is based on bias, not fact." The hall erupted into noise. Some students jeered, calling her reckless. Others whispered in excitement, intrigued by her audacity. Var Kran's colors swirled into a mix of red and orange, signaling both frustration and curiosity. He raised a hand, and the noise died down. "You are bold, Miss Julia," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "But boldness alone will not save your species' place here. Very well. If you insist on a trial, the Council will deliberate and decide the parameters of your challenge. Do not expect mercy." "I'm not asking for mercy," Julia shot back. "Just a fair chance." With that, Var Kran exited the stage, leaving the hall buzzing with speculation. Julia sank back into her seat, her adrenaline fading and doubt creeping in. David leaned over, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about this? What if they make it impossible?" "Then I'll show them that humans don't give up," Julia said firmly, though her heart pounded with uncertainty. "If we're going to be expelled, I'd rather go down fighting." Word of Julia's defiance spread quickly throughout the academy. By the end of the day, she was the center of attention, with alien students debating whether she had a chance and faculty members quietly discussing the implications of her stand. Julia, meanwhile, retreated to her dorm room, where the other human students had gathered. "You really put us on the line, Julia," one of them said, his voice tense. "What if you fail? You'll make us look even worse." Julia met his gaze. "And if I didn't say anything? They'd just push us out without a second thought. At least this way we have a shot." David stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll help you prepare, no matter what they throw at you." Julia nodded, grateful for his support. But deep down, she knew the weight of the challenge rested squarely on her shoulders. The next 48 hours would determine not only her future but the reputation of her entire species in the eyes of the galaxy. Julia spent the night in restless preparation, her mind racing with thoughts of what the challenge might entail. The Galactic Academy was renowned for its grueling tests, designed to push even the most advanced alien species to their limits. The fact that this trial was being orchestrated specifically for her made it all the more daunting. She had no illusions that the Council would play fair. Still, her resolve burned bright. If this was her chance to prove humanity's worth, she wouldn't waste it. The next morning, she awoke to a message notification. The glowing hologram above her desk displayed a terse summons from Principal Var Kran. "The trial will commence tomorrow at dawn. Full details will be disclosed then. Prepare accordingly." It was frustratingly vague, but Julia had expected no less. She pushed herself out of bed and began strategizing. Her dorm room, usually a quiet haven, had turned into a bustling hub of activity. David and a few other human students were already there, sifting through academy records and brainstorming possible scenarios. "They'll probably go for something physical first," David suggested, scrolling through a database of past trials. "Humans aren't as strong or fast as most species here. It's an easy way to stack the odds against you." "Maybe," Julia replied, pacing the room. "But they know that's too predictable. They'll want to humiliate me on every level: physical, intellectual, and emotional. We need to cover all bases." Another student, Elena, chimed in. "What about the Elvirate empathy trials? Those are notorious for breaking even the toughest competitors. If they put you through one of those, it'll be brutal." Julia nodded. "Then I'll need to be ready for that too. Let's focus on strategies for endurance, problem-solving, and emotional resilience. If they think they can break me, they're in for a surprise." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of training. David led Julia through zero-gravity obstacle simulations, pushing her to adapt to the unpredictable environments often used in academy challenges. Elena worked with her on complex logic puzzles, sharpening her ability to think under pressure. By evening, Julia felt physically and mentally drained, but the camaraderie of her peers fueled her determination. As the sun set, a surprising visitor arrived at her dorm. Nyx, an Elvirate student with whom Julia had shared an uneasy friendship, floated into the room. Nyx's translucent body glowed faintly in the dim light, her luminous eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "I heard about your challenge," Nyx said, her melodic voice cutting through the chatter. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Probably a bit of both," Julia replied with a wry smile. "What do you want, Nyx? Here to gloat?" Nyx tilted her head, the gesture both alien and oddly familiar. "No, I came to help. If the Council is targeting you, they'll use tactics designed to exploit human weaknesses. But I've seen you adapt in ways my species can't comprehend. You have strengths they don't expect. If you're willing, I can give you insights into their methods." Julia's eyes narrowed. "Why would you want to help me?" Nyx hesitated before responding. "Because I respect you. Most humans would have accepted their fate, but you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. That kind of determination deserves a chance." The room fell silent as the other humans exchanged skeptical glances. Julia studied Nyx, weighing her sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "All right, what do you suggest?" Nyx spent the next few hours guiding Julia through techniques that leveraged her human instincts and adaptability. She emphasized the importance of lateral thinking, using creativity to approach problems in ways alien species might overlook. Julia absorbed the lessons like a sponge, grateful for the unexpected ally. By the time Nyx left, it was well past midnight. Julia collapsed onto her bed, her body aching and her mind buzzing with strategies. Sleep was elusive, but she managed a few restless hours before her alarm jolted her awake. The day of the trial had arrived. At dawn, Julia stood at the edge of the Academy's central arena, a massive dome surrounded by towering spires of alien architecture. The stands were packed with students and faculty from across the galaxy, their voices a cacophony of curiosity and anticipation. Julia could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their expectations pressing down like a physical force. Principal Var Kran stood at the center of the arena, his translucent head glowing a deep, steady red. Beside him was a holographic projection of the trial's parameters. As Julia stepped forward, the projection shifted, displaying 3 distinct phases: physical endurance, intellectual mastery, and emotional resilience. Var Kran's voice echoed through the arena. "Julia, you have insisted on this trial to prove humanity's worth. Be warned, failure in any phase will result in immediate expulsion, not only for you but for all human students. Do you understand?" "I understand," Julia replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Then let us begin." The first phase was announced as zero-gravity obstacle course. The arena transformed before Julia's eyes as massive panels shifted and rearranged, creating a labyrinth of floating platforms, spinning wheels, and narrow tunnels. She had trained for this, but the scale and complexity were far beyond anything she had anticipated. As she stepped onto the starting platform, she felt the weightlessness take hold. Her heart raced as the countdown began. When the signal blared, she launched herself forward, using her momentum to navigate the floating platforms. The alien students jeered from the stands, but Julia tuned them out, focusing on each movement with laser precision. The course was relentless, with spinning obstacles designed to disorient and mechanical arms attempting to knock her off balance. Julia relied on her training, using her smaller frame and agility to maneuver through tight spaces and avoid the hazards. Halfway through, she faced a particularly tricky section, a rotating cylinder that required split-second timing to cross. Taking a deep breath, she leaped and managed to cling to the edge, pulling herself up just in time to avoid being flung into the void. As she neared the finish line, Julia felt her muscles burning and her lungs gasping for air. But the roar of the crowd, some cheering, others booing, pushed her onward. With one final leap, she crossed the finish line, collapsing onto the platform as the arena erupted in noise. Var Kran's voice cut through the din. Phase 1 complete. Julia has demonstrated satisfactory physical capability. Proceed to Phase 2. Julia barely had time to catch her breath before the second challenge began, a logic puzzle projected as a 3-dimensional hologram. The puzzle was a complex network of glowing nodes, each connected by intricate patterns that required deciphering. She had to align the nodes in a specific sequence to unlock the solution. Her mind raced as she analyzed the puzzle. It was designed to overwhelm, with patterns that shifted unpredictably and false leads meant to confuse. Julia focused on finding the underlying logic, ignoring the jeers and taunts from the stands. Sweat dripped down her forehead as the timer ticked away, but she refused to panic. Finally, with seconds to spare, Julia connected the final nodes. The hologram glowed brightly before dissolving, signaling her success. The crowd erupted again, their reactions mixed but undeniably impressed. Phase 2 complete, Var Kran announced, his tone begrudgingly neutral. Julia has displayed intellectual aptitude. Prepare for the final phase. Julia's legs trembled as she stood, exhaustion threatening to overtake her. But she pushed the fatigue aside, steeling herself for what she knew would be the most challenging test, yet the emotional trial. Julia stood in the center of the arena, her chest heaving as she tried to regain her breath. The physical and intellectual challenges had pushed her to her limits, but she knew the final phase would be the true test. The emotional trial was not just about endurance or problem-solving, it was about resilience, the ability to maintain composure and clarity under profound stress. It was the kind of trial that could strip away a person's defenses, exposing their rawest vulnerabilities. The arena shifted again, its high walls folding inward to create an intimate, circular space. The grandstands were obscured, leaving Julia alone in the center under a spotlight. Above her, a holographic projection of Principal Var Kran's head appeared, his translucent features glowing with a deep orange hue. For the final phase, Var Kran began, his voice reverberating ominously, "You will enter a simulated environment designed to test your emotional resilience. This trial will evaluate your ability to make decisions under extreme pressure, balance empathy with logic, and confront your deepest fears. There will be no guidance, no lifelines. You must rely entirely on your instincts. Do you accept this challenge?" Julia wiped the sweat from her brow, her body still aching from the previous phases. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. The moment she spoke, the spotlight above her dimmed, and the ground beneath her shimmered with light. The entire arena seemed to dissolve, replaced by a virtual simulation so vivid it felt real. She found herself standing in the middle of a desolate alien landscape. The sky above was a deep, swirling red, and jagged black mountains loomed in the distance. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal, and faint cries echoed around her. Julia turned slowly, her senses on high alert. In the distance, she saw a small alien village in ruins, smoke rising from charred structures. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, some alien, some human. Her heart clenched at the sight. The simulation had been crafted to evoke the deepest pangs of guilt, fear, and responsibility. "Help us." A voice cried out. Julia spun toward the sound and saw a group of survivors huddled near the wreckage of a building. They were a mix of alien species and a few human figures, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. A Zargathian elder, his massive frame trembling, clutched a young human child who looked no older than 8. Julia rushed toward them, her instincts screaming to act. As she reached the group, the elder looked up at her, his glowing eyes filled with desperation. "The enemy is coming," he rasped. "We have injured who cannot move. We need to evacuate, but there's no time. What do we do?" Julia glanced around, her mind racing. The simulation was designed to force impossible choices. There were no clear answers, only consequences. She noticed 2 possible escape routes. One led through a narrow canyon that could provide cover but would be treacherous for the injured to navigate. The other was a wide-open plain, faster but leaving them exposed to the pursuing enemy. "We need to carry the injured," Julia said, her voice firm. "We'll take the canyon. It's our best chance." Several survivors hesitated. "The canyon is dangerous," one of the humans said. "If we fall behind, we'll be sitting ducks." Julia clenched her fists. "Then we don't fall behind. We move together, and we don't leave anyone behind. Now let's go." The group scrambled to follow her lead. Julia helped the elder lift the injured child onto his back, and together they began their trek toward the canyon. The simulation shifted subtly as they moved. The air grew heavier, the cries of the unseen enemy closer. Julia's pulse quickened, but she kept her focus, urging the group forward. As they reached the canyon entrance, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A distant rumble grew louder, and Julia turned to see a massive shadow moving across the horizon. The enemy was no longer just a threat, it was real. Alien war machines, towering and grotesque, emerged from the haze, their weapons trained on the fleeing group. Panic rippled through the survivors. "We're not going to make it," someone shouted. "Yes, we will." Julia yelled back. "Keep moving." The group entered the canyon, the walls towering above them. The path was narrow and uneven, forcing them to move slowly. One of the injured, a young Elvirate with a shattered leg, stumbled and cried out in pain. Julia dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to lift him. "Leave me," the Elvirate gasped. "You'll never make it if you carry me." Julia's chest tightened. Every instinct told her to press on, to save the others. But she couldn't abandon someone, even in a simulation. "We don't leave anyone behind," she said, her voice fierce. With the help of the Zargathian elder, she hoisted the Elvirate onto her back and continued forward. The enemy machines reached the canyon entrance, their weapons firing. Rocks exploded around them, sending shards of debris raining down. Julia felt her legs shaking under the weight of the Elvirate, but she refused to stop. Every step was a battle, every breath a struggle. She could hear the screams of the survivors behind her, the chaos threatening to overwhelm her. Finally, they emerged from the canyon into a hidden valley. The survivors collapsed onto the ground, their bodies battered but alive. The enemy machines stopped at the canyon's edge, unable to follow through the narrow path. Julia sank to her knees, her heart pounding. She had made it barely. The simulation didn't end. Instead, the holographic sky shifted again, and a new scenario unfolded. This time, Julia found herself alone in a dark room, facing a hologram of herself. The projection spoke in her own voice, its tone cold and accusatory. "You think you've proven something?" it said. "You barely saved them. You made mistakes. People died because of you." Julia stared at the hologram, her exhaustion threatening to consume her. "I did the best I could," she said, her voice cracking. "Was it enough?" The hologram pressed. "Do you really believe humans deserve a place here? You think your determination means anything to them? They'll always see you as lesser." Julia clenched her fists. The simulation wasn't just testing her decisions, it was testing her will. "Maybe they will," she said, "but I'm not here to change their opinions. I'm here to prove that we don't give up, no matter how hard they push us. That's what makes us human." The hologram faded, and the simulation ended. Julia found herself back in the arena, the grandstands coming into view. The crowd was silent, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Principal Varkran stepped forward, his translucent head glowing a subdued blue. "Julia," he said, his voice carrying a note of begrudging respect, "you have completed the trial. Despite the odds, you demonstrated resilience, leadership, and an unwavering commitment to your principles. The council will deliberate on this outcome." Julia stood tall, her body trembling but her spirit unbroken. Whatever the decision, she knew she had given everything she had. In the faces of the students around her, she saw something new, not pity, not disdain, but a spark of respect. For the first time, Julia felt the weight of her fight lift, replaced by the quiet certainty that she had done her part. The grandstands remained silent as Julia stood in the arena, her breath steadying after the intense simulation. The weight of the final trial hung heavily on her shoulders, but her heart swelled with a quiet pride. She had faced the impossible and emerged intact. Whether it was enough to sway the Galactic Council was another matter entirely. Above her, the towering figure of Principal Varkran remained still, his translucent head glowing faintly with a hue that Julia couldn't decipher. She wasn't sure if it signified anger, contemplation, or something else entirely. "Julia," Varkran finally said, his voice calm yet commanding, "you have completed the trial, but the outcome is not yours to declare. The Galactic Council will now deliberate." With a wave of his hand, the arena shifted once more. Panels rose from the ground, forming an ornate platform at the center of the space. The platform shimmered as holograms of the council members materialized. The figures represented the most influential species across the galaxy, each one radiating an air of authority. Their presence was overwhelming, even in digital form. Julia swallowed hard as she stepped forward. The council's holographic eyes bore into her, unblinking and cold. She could feel the tension in the air as the crowd leaned forward, eager to hear the verdict. Every decision made in this arena would ripple far beyond its walls, affecting not only her life but the future of every human seeking to prove their worth among the stars. The head of the council, a towering Aravelian with crystalline skin that refracted light into a dazzling array of colors, spoke first. "Julia, human representative, your performance in the trial has been observed with great scrutiny. It is now time to evaluate whether your actions have demonstrated the qualities necessary to justify humanity's continued presence at this institution." Julia straightened her posture, her eyes meeting the Aravelian's gaze. "I stand by everything I've done," she said, her voice unwavering. "I gave everything I had. That's all I could do." The Aravelian inclined its head slightly, but there was no indication of approval or disapproval. Another council member, a serpentine being with glowing scales, chimed in, its voice sharp and hissing. "Your actions saved lives in the simulation, yes, but at what cost? You chose the longer, more dangerous path, putting the entire group at risk. Was that truly the best decision?" Julia felt a flicker of doubt but quickly pushed it aside. "I chose the path that would protect everyone," she replied firmly. "The open plain would have exposed us all to immediate attack. The canyon gave us a fighting chance, even if it was more dangerous. It was a calculated risk, and it worked." The Serpentine Council members' scales shifted to a darker shade, but it offered no further argument. A third member, a shimmering orb of light that pulsed rhythmically as it spoke, posed another question. "In the final moments of the trial, you confronted your own insecurities. You claimed that humanity's strength lies in its perseverance. But does persistence alone warrant a place in this academy? Many species here are capable of enduring hardship. What makes humanity different?" Julia paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The question wasn't unexpected, but it struck at the heart of her argument. It's not just perseverance, she began. It's adaptability. Humans don't just survive, we learn, we grow, and we find new ways to overcome challenges. That's what allowed me to complete the trials today. Every obstacle was designed to exploit my weaknesses, but I found ways to adapt and succeed. That's what humanity brings to the table. The orb pulsed slightly faster, as if considering her words. Before it could respond, another voice cut through the deliberation. Enough. It was Principal Varkran, his tone sharp and commanding. The council has heard her words and witnessed her actions. It is time to make a decision. The holographic council members exchanged glances or their equivalent, given their vastly different anatomies. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the tension in the arena growing with each passing second. Julia's hands clenched at her sides, her mind racing with 1,000 possible outcomes. She had given everything she had, but was it enough? Finally, the Aravelian spoke again. The council has reached a consensus. Julia, your performance in the trial has demonstrated qualities of resilience, leadership, and adaptability. These are traits we value highly in this academy. However, there are those among us who remain unconvinced of humanity's overall suitability. Julia's heart sank, but she refused to let her disappointment show. She stood tall, waiting for the final verdict. To address these concerns, the Aravelian continued, the Council has decided to implement a probationary period. Humanity will retain its place at the Galactic Academy, but your progress will be closely monitored. Should there be any indication that humans cannot meet the Academy's standards, this decision will be revisited. The crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and murmurs. Some alien students looked outraged, while others nodded thoughtfully. Julia felt a wave of relief wash over her, though it was tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. She had won a reprieve, not a victory. Varkran stepped forward, his translucent head glowing a pale blue. Julia, you have earned your place here for now. But understand this, the eyes of the Academy are upon you. Do not squander this opportunity. Julia met his gaze, her expression resolute. I won't. As the arena began to dissolve back into its original state, Julia turned to see David and the other human students rushing toward her. Their faces were alight with pride and gratitude. You did it. David exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. You proved them wrong. Julia smiled, but her mind was already racing ahead. The probationary period meant every action she took from now on would be scrutinized. There would be no room for error, no second chances. Still, she felt a spark of hope. This was more than just a personal victory, it was a chance for humanity to carve out a place in the galaxy. As the group made their way back to the dorms, Julia glanced around at the Academy's towering spires and bustling halls. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she was ready. For the first time, she felt truly at home among the stars. Julia sat alone in the quiet corner of the Galactic Academy's observation deck, her eyes fixed on the expanse of stars beyond the transparent dome. The events of the past few days had left her physically and emotionally drained. The victory she had achieved in the arena felt bittersweet. Humanity's place at the Academy had been secured, but only on a probationary basis. It was a tenuous foothold, one that could be lost with a single misstep. Yet, as she gazed out at the endless void, Julia felt a glimmer of something she hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace until now: hope. The Academy was alive with its usual energy, the halls buzzing with activity as students from countless species moved between classes, training sessions, and research labs. Julia's trials had become the talk of the institution, and her name was on everyone's lips. Some spoke of her with admiration, others with disdain, but none could ignore her anymore. For the first time, humanity was not invisible in the eyes of the galaxy. Despite the attention, Julia found herself retreating into solitude. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her. The probationary period meant every move she made, every test she took, would be scrutinized not just by her peers but by the council itself. One failure could undo everything she had fought for. The stakes were higher than ever. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of the observation deck's door sliding open. She turned to see David stepping inside, his expression a mix of concern and determination. He carried a small holoprojector in his hand. Mind if I join you? He asked, his voice breaking the silence. Julia nodded, offering him a faint smile. Of course. I could use the company. David sat beside her, placing the projector on the table between them. He activated it, and a three-dimensional image of Earth appeared, spinning slowly in the air. Julia's chest tightened at the sight of her home planet, so far away yet so deeply ingrained in her heart. I thought you might need a reminder of why you're doing this, David said, gesturing to the hologram. It's easy to get lost in all the noise here, but don't forget what's at stake. Julia stared at the image, her mind flooding with memories of Earth, its sprawling cities, its untamed wilderness, its people. I haven't forgotten, she said softly. If anything, it's all I can think about. Every step I take here, I'm doing it for them. For us. David nodded, his gaze serious. Then don't let the pressure get to you. You've already proven more than anyone expected. The council may have put us on probation, but that's still a win. Now we just need to keep proving ourselves. Julia let his words sink in. He was right. She had fought too hard to let doubt creep in now. The probationary period wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. A chance to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. She just needed to stay focused. Over the next few weeks, Julia threw herself into her studies and training with renewed vigor. Every class became a proving ground, every assignment a chance to showcase the unique strengths of humanity. She pushed herself harder than ever, refusing to let the weight of expectations slow her down. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. In one of her engineering classes, she devised an innovative solution to a problem involving interstellar navigation, earning the respect of her alien classmates. In a combat simulation, she outmaneuvered a team of physically superior opponents by using her creativity and adaptability. Slowly but surely, the perception of humanity at the Academy began to shift. Even Nyx, the Elvirate who had initially offered her guidance with skepticism, became a steadfast ally. The two of them formed an unlikely partnership, combining their respective strengths to tackle complex challenges. Nyx's analytical mind and Julia's intuitive problem-solving created a synergy that impressed even the most critical instructors. But not everyone was convinced. There were still those who viewed humanity as an unworthy addition to the Academy. Julia often overheard whispers in the halls, snide remarks about humans being primitive or lucky. She ignored them, channeling her frustration into her work. One day, during a high-profile presentation on cultural diplomacy, Julia faced one of her fiercest critics, a Yurnak student named Trelix, known for his disdain toward humans. Trelix questioned her credibility in front of the entire class, challenging her ability to represent a species so young and insignificant. Julia took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding. "You're right," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Humanity is young compared to most species here. But that's exactly why we belong. We're still learning, still growing, and that gives us a perspective that others might overlook. We see challenges as opportunities, not obstacles. And that's something I think the galaxy can benefit from." Her words resonated with the audience, even earning a reluctant nod from Trelix. It was a small victory, but one that fueled her resolve. As the weeks turned into months, the probationary period drew to a close. The Galactic Council convened once more to evaluate humanity's progress. The entire Academy gathered in the arena, the air thick with anticipation. Julia stood at the center, flanked by her human peers, her heart pounding in her chest. The Aravelian Council member addressed the assembly. "Julia, human representative, the Council has reviewed your performance and the contributions of your peers over the past months. We have witnessed resilience, innovation, and a willingness to adapt. However, there is still much to prove." Julia held her breath as the Council deliberated. The decision felt like an eternity in coming, but when the Aravelian finally spoke again, her heart soared. "Humanity's probationary period is hereby lifted. You have earned your place at the Galactic Academy. Let this be the beginning of a new chapter, not just for your species but for all of us." The arena erupted into applause, a mix of cheers and murmurs of approval. Julia felt tears welling in her eyes as she turned to her friends, their faces lit with pride and relief. She had done it. Humanity had done it. In the days that followed, Julia became a symbol of perseverance and hope. Her journey inspired not only her fellow humans but students from other species who saw her as a testament to the power of determination. The Galactic Academy was no longer just a place of learning, it was a place where unity and diversity could thrive. As Julia stood once more on the observation deck, staring out at the stars, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't over, it was just beginning. But for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would build a future that was truly worthy of the stars.